here to talk about the Palestine exception to free speech on college campuses. And we're just going to start off with some presentations and then go into like a discussion style event. As an activist with Students for Justice in Palestine at NYU, I've been called many things, including a self-hating Jew, anti-Semitic.
I was called a member of Al-Qaeda, I was called a terrorist, I was called many racial slurs.
After the American Studies Association passed the resolution to support the academic boycott of Israeli universities, we were the subject of a tsunami of onslaughts.
My career was destroyed because of gross mischaracterizations of my tweets critical of the Israeli government. I lost my home, I lost my income.
Unfortunately, despite all the human rights work we did at NYU, a lot of us, myself included, feel like publicly we have to hide this activism because of these rumors and these accusations that have been leveled against us.
I edited my resume to remove SJP. I made sure it wasn't on my LinkedIn. I tried to limit how much of it was on Facebook.
It did have the effect of making students hesitant to join SJP or to support Palestine solidarity work.
Administration at Loyola often subjected members of Students for Justice in Palestine to FBI-style interrogations, which lasted hours.
An administrator, usually some sort of middle-tier bureaucrat, who smiles at us and tells us, this isn't about us, but it's just standard policy. Even though we all organize with different groups and have never experienced that with those groups.
It was actually my involvement with SJP that led me to being denied from my homeland, Palestine, by Israel.
They forced us to pay a large sum of money for security guards, which were completely unnecessary.
I actually haven't heard of any other group that had to have security at every single event that they host.
You go to an SJP event, because the administration, I think, is so nervous about what's going to happen. You have to go through a metal detector. You have to, well, first you have to sign up in advance and reserve a spot online. Then you have to go through a security check. I mean, it's like you're at Kennedy Airport.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Radhika Sainath, from an attorney at Palestine Legal. As Sarah sort of introduced, what Palestine Legal does is we represent civil rights activists, students, and professors who are speaking out on the issue of Palestinian human rights here in the United States. And I just want to start off by saying, well, I think as many of you know, and on the Facebook page, Palestine Legal, along with CCR, recently released a report in September called The Palestine Exception to Free Speech. And we've been doing, Omar and I have been doing a number of events around the country actually together. We've done events at NYU Law, Harvard Law, Columbia. My office has done events in Chicago and California, at UCLA. And I just got to say that this is the first event that I've been to where, I had to go through a security checkpoint and get wanded and get, stopped by police officers. And I actually interviewed Corey Robin for this piece. And when I interviewed him and, he was saying that going to an SJP event at Brooklyn College was like JFK Airport, I was like, all right, that's a metaphor. Maybe there's a metal detector. And I was like, whoa, this is worse than JFK Airport, because at JFK Airport, at least I have like TSA pre-check. No, but it's not like a serious wanding. I mean, wow, it's kind of crazy what you guys have to go through, especially with the first door for other meetings where there's no security, but for a talk on actually how people who are speaking out on Palestinian rights are treated differently from everyone else. You actually get treated differently from everyone else. So I've known about this. All this stuff is actually in a report, but experiencing it firsthand, I gotta say, wow. So I'll just start off by saying that. So our report basically documents for the first time these incidents, these incidents of suppression that we're seeing in the United States. Basically, what we're seeing is this growing movement for Palestinian rights. And that's a really exciting thing. I think people in the United States are really sick of the status quo between Israel and Palestine. But along with this growing movement, which we're especially seeing on college campuses, we're also seeing a growth in this concerted effort to suppress any and all criticism of Israel. And I think that's what you guys have experienced here at Brooklyn College. And the point of this report is, I mean, I think a lot of people, not even just students or activists, but regular people who maybe even just journalists in the media or, professors or someone just, trying to wear a keffiyeh because that's their heritage. I think, a lot of people know that if you say something that's perceived to be critical of Israel, you're going to be treated differently, suppressed, criticized, silenced, and so on. But what this report does is actually document for the first time this widespread problem in the United States. And its kind of purpose is to show that Brooklyn College isn't unique, actually. It's happening all across the country, and there's 1,000 footnotes in that report backing up the evidence. So basically, what is the Palestine exception to free speech? It's basically saying that advocates who speak out for Palestinian rights are routinely questioned, threatened, falsely accused, censored, or punished. And here are just a few pictures. When I say advocate for Palestinian rights or speak up for Palestinian rights, I mean, I think you guys know this, but sometimes I give this talk outside of college campuses, and they're like, what are these students doing? So I like to show these pictures, but these are you guys. This is a John Jay event, Columbia mock checkpoint action, mock eviction actions, apartheid wall. These are the kinds of things we're talking about in the report when we say that free speech, in support of Palestinian rights, is being suppressed. It's this kind of stuff that students are doing that Israel advocacy groups are trying to get schools to stop. And of course, that's completely protected First Amendment activity. Speech that is controversial or uncivil or quote unquote stirs people to anger, I'm quoting the Supreme Court here, is what the First Amendment is all about. So all the stuff that I know you guys tend to do on campuses that college students have done since especially during the 60s, during the civil rights era, during the 80s, during the anti-apartheid movement in the 90s. When I was in college, there was a lot of stuff on immigration issues. This is what SJPs are doing isn't new. The issue might be newer, but the kinds of tactics that you're using is just classic First Amendment protected stuff, but we're seeing a wave of repression trying to get you guys to not be able to say this or to put pressure on administrators to silence your human rights activity. Okay, so over an 18-month period from January 2014 to June 2015, Palestine Legal responded to 292 incidents of suppression, 24 states. And 292, when we say 292, we don't mean that there were only 292 incidents in the United States. We're saying this is what we responded to. This is what you guys called us about and that we advised you on and put them in our database. So obviously, we're a really small office. We only started a couple years ago in 2012. I'm the only attorney in New York in Palestine Legal. We have a couple of attorneys in Chicago and one attorney in the Bay Area. So we're handling the whole United States. So obviously, this number is really just the tip of the iceberg. It's just what we know about. We do know that there's a whole lot happening under the water that isn't necessarily documented. And out of these incidents, 85% have targeted academics and professors or students. And the report, details data from 69 different campuses. Just throwing this little map out here for you just to give you an idea of how the incidents map out. A third actually happened in California, my home state, but New York gets the next most with 43. Again, there's a lot more going on here, but this is just what people have contacted us about in the United States. So in responding to hundreds of calls and emails from you all in the 3 years that we've been, 3 years that we've been in operation, we've noticed some patterns start to emerge. And our report documents 9 different tactics used by Israel advocacy groups to silence speech supporting Palestine. And I'm going to I'll go through them kind of quickly, but I just threw these charts up there just so you know that, there is data for those of you who, like to look at charts and stuff. You can look at our report and read the math. All right, so the number one incident that we've tracked is false accusations of anti-Semitism, basically equating support for Palestinian rights or criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, which is criticism of Jews or bigotry against Jews as a people. And those are two different things. And the strategy to try to change the definition of anti-Semitism to to include criticism of a nation state is actually a strategy to try to malign activists and to get them to, feel scared about actually speaking out in support of Palestinian rights. And of course, any kind of bigotry or Islamophobia or xenophobia towards anyone should absolutely be condemned. But what this report is talking about, and what the problem is that we've documented, is that actually, people are speaking out for a human rights issue, and they're being maligned and labeled falsely with being anti-Semites, and wrongly. So over half of the incidents that we've documented include these false accusations of anti-Semitism. The other thing that we've seen a lot of, particularly affecting, Middle Eastern students, Arab students, Muslim students, South Asian students, are false accusations of support for terrorism. So again, basically trying to malign activists by saying that if you support Palestinian human rights or Palestinian freedom, you're supporting Hamas, or you're a terrorist, or things like that. And of course, these can have a real chilling effect and can have a terrible effect on people's ability to speak out, as you guys know, because it can ruin careers, especially in this day and age when, you got a 12-year-old kid in Texas who's arrested for bringing a clock to school because he's Muslim. Calling a college student a supporter of terrorism can have a real chilling effect. And actually, a number of students have actually called us and told us that because of this Canary Mission website. How many of you guys have heard of this website? It's basically, a lot of you are probably on it. It's basically this website that profiles activists and maligns them, and which stated purpose is to make it so that students who support Palestinian rights cannot get jobs. And it can be really, really terrifying, especially, in this job market, especially, to feel that if you're going to take a principled human rights stance, that you might not get a job. And a number of students have come to us and said that they're afraid to take leadership positions in SJP because of this website. All right. Official denunciations. So this tactic is basically where administrators, condemn support for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or Palestinian human rights. We've seen this on a lot of different universities. I'll give you one example that's in the report where Mark Yudof, the former president of the UC system, a couple years ago, actually equated a peaceful walkout by students of an event featuring an Israeli soldier to drawing swastikas, hanging nooses, or vandalism of a campus LGBTQ center. So these kinds of statements can actually, again, be really harmful for student organizing, especially when you all are social justice activists. And, this has happened a lot at Brooklyn College too, where you've had things like, like government officials like Dov Hickens condemn Brooklyn College or SJP activity, again, supporting boycott, divestment, sanctions, or trying to have a conversation on Palestinian rights and try to get schools to squelch that speech. This one I actually like to talk about. I think you guys have faced it a lot here also. It's very common in the CUNY system and in public schools, which we call bureaucratic barriers. I like to talk about this because it sounds really boring, bureaucratic barriers, but it can be quite nefarious. And that's where administrations set up a number of hurdles or obstacles that make it really difficult to organize events for Palestinian rights. And it's the kind of thing that, even if you're really, really well read on this issue and really read the alternative press, you might not actually hear about, because it's just these kinds of things where, students are pulled in to meetings all the time. Their room reservations are being lost. They're forced to fill out additional paperwork. They're forced to pay security fees because their events are controversial. And all of this can be extremely exhausting, especially when you have to balance your schoolwork and your job and all this other stuff. And again, it's the kind of thing, there's what we call it's disparate treatment, right? So where clubs that are similarly situated are treated differently. So it's the kind of thing that only SJPs have to go through, right? So other students organizing on similar issues aren't faced with these obstacles. They aren't having their flyers scrutinized, and told to put disclaimers at the bottom, or told that their street theater performances of illustrating an Israeli checkpoint, that their scripts need to be reviewed or changed meticulously. I've had students call me and say that their university has told them, you can't say the word Israeli apartheid. And often students don't know that it is their First Amendment right to be able to say that at a public university. So they're like, oh, I wasn't going to say that because my administration said I couldn't say that. I've had students at public schools tell me that they were told they wanted to do an event on refugees and Palestinian refugees, kind of double refugees from Syria that were refugees again. And the administration told them, well, maybe don't use the word Palestine, just say refugees. Like, can't you just do an event on refugees? So this is all kinds of censorship and, all of these hurdles that are coming up that, again, make it really difficult to organize. It's not something that's just happening on its own. Administrations are being pressured to do this. But again, it violates your rights. And even if you don't really care about the issue of Israel-Palestine, and a number of people, maybe don't care about it, or even Zionist or really support Israel or are for settlements, are against this mistreatment because they know that colleges are supposed to be this like marketplace for idea, like this place of free exchange of ideas and debate where other points of view, not just the ones that are in the dominant narrative, are heard. So that's bureaucratic barriers. Administrative sanctions. I'm not going to really talk about this. I mean, this is where, like at Northeastern, Students for Justice for Palestine chapter was suspended for distributing mock eviction flyers detailing facts about Israel's eviction policies, Israel's policies of actually demolishing Palestinian homes. And again, so there are rules often in dorms that you can't distribute flyers under doors. They get broken all the time. They get broken all the time at Northeastern, frat party flyers, Chinese food menus, all kinds of things. But hey, when you distribute a flyer supporting Palestinian rights, all of a sudden, and this is what happened, the club got suspended. 3 students got interrogated by the police. After we intervened, us CCR, along with the ACLU of Massachusetts and the NLG, the school actually backed off and unsuspended the club because they realized they would be in violation of Massachusetts law by doing so. But it still put a lot of pressure under the club. Threats to academic freedom. I'm going to skip this one because I'm going to let Omar talk about Stephen Salaitha's case because he represented Stephen Salaitha, and he can tell you about that. Lawsuits and legal threats. Again, everything from co-ops being threatened with lawsuits for deshelving Israeli products to schools being threatened with Title VI suits for allowing free speech activity. The Title VI issue is basically Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is actually it's actually like a great piece of legislation that protects students. And it came out of the civil rights era, but it's been used recently by Israel advocacy groups to try to get universities to censor speech activity such as a Palestine 101 video or mock checkpoints or things like that by claiming that speech supporting Palestinian rights creates an unsafe or hostile environment for Jewish students. Now, these kinds of complaints are filed with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, and in all 6 of the known complaints, like the DOE dismissed them, and they issued these really great statements saying, this kind of speech is the kind that students in higher education should reasonably be expected to encounter. It's First Amendment activity. I mean, the letters are really great, and they were thrown out. The UC schools, Rutgers, Barnard, but the Brandeis Center, which brought them, actually said, well, even though we're losing and even though it looks bad, we're not actually losing because these complaints actually can be open for years. And during this period when they're open, a lot of students don't want to join SJP. Schools don't want to be under investigation for accusations. So it actually helps us win to actually file these complaints even when they are baseless. I'm going to wrap it up soon. Legislation. It's actually 29 right now. So, a lot of legislation is being introduced. Sheldon Adelson, this GOP mega donor, Republican mega donor, actually bragged about raising $20 million to counter campus BDS efforts last June. And I think we're seeing some of that money being spent in this wave of legislation to try to get states to either condemn boycott activity or punish boycott activity. Boycott activity, by the way, is completely protected by the First Amendment. Supreme Court is really clear about that. Cancellations and alterations of academic events. We've heard a lot of these. So things like, Remy Kanazi, Palestinian poet, at a number of schools that he's tried to speak to, there's been pressure to cancel that event. This is a picture of the Missouri History Museum in St. Louis. Organizers of an event from Ferguson to Palestine were actually told that they couldn't go forward with the event if they allowed the Palestine portion of the event to go forth. These were all revealed through Public Records Act requests that actually Israel advocacy groups pressured the museum to do this. These are pictures, this is actually kind of a sad one, because there was an exhibit at the Mocha Museum for Children in Oakland featuring Palestinian children in Gaza's drawings. And the museum had actually done similar exhibits with Iraqi children in the past. But after getting pressured by Israel advocacy groups, they actually canceled that exhibit. So I'm just going to end by saying, I've kind of thrown out a lot, like the First Amendment, this and this. And if you're not law students or you're not lawyers, maybe you're like, all right, the First Amendment, that seems rather theoretical. Why is that so important? But it's actually really important, all of the stuff that's happening, because it can have a real serious impact on higher education by limiting debate. And even more than that, this Palestine exception, this censorship and punishment of people can ruin reputations. It's caused the loss of jobs, can really drain resources of people who have to try to fight this, all for engaging in what's supposed to be their basic First Amendment right to talk about or support a cause that they believe in, and is actually a really noble one. But, I'll just say, what can we do? Please do, document incidents of these kinds of things. If they happen to you, share it with people, share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share it with us so we can track it. You can share our video also, and publicly oppose it as well, and of course urge your universities to protect your rights. And that's our contact info. But I'll switch it over to Omar now.
And I just want to echo what Radhika started with. I mean, I've been an organizer, attorney on Palestine issues for over a decade, and I've gone to many campuses and talked about this issue and dealt with this issue, and I've never quite gone through the experience of entering CUNY Brooklyn College like we did today. I felt like I was entering a military zone. I was in Guantanamo Bay last week. I work with representing clients there, and honestly, in some ways, this felt like more of a security search than even entering the detention facility there. I'm not even joking. So a lot of admiration to all of you who deal with this every single day, and that's why we're having this conversation. I think Radhika gave you a very sort of comprehensive overview about our report and sort of the different tactics that we've documented in it. What I want to do is take one example, one instant that we've worked on at the Center for Constitutional Rights, and kind of walk through the details to really get a flavor for not only how these practices are carried out, but the way in which it really affects the life of an individual who's caught in the crosshairs of the suppression efforts by Israel advocacy groups. And that's the case of Professor Stephen Salaita. So I'll talk about the case at length, and then, if I have time at the end, I may just mention one or two other examples before we hear more about the CUNY experience and go into Q&A. So, our story with Professor Salaita really begins in the fall of 2012. So Professor Salaita, for those who aren't familiar, is a professor of Indigenous Studies. He was a tenured professor at Virginia Tech. He was tenured at the age of 33 back in 2009. Very prolific scholar. He's written 7 books. He's 40 years old right now. In 2007, he won the Myers Outstanding Book Prize. Very highly regarded for his scholarship and for his teaching abilities. So in the fall of 2012, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign had a job search. They were looking for a faculty position to teach Indigenous studies. They had an open search. They recruited top faculty from across the country, hundreds of applications, one of whom was Professor Salaita. Professor Salaita applied for the position. He was eventually invited to interview at the university. He gave a job talk, and ultimately in September of 2013, he was offered the job to be a tenured professor of Indigenous Studies. He was sent an offer by his email. In October, he signed and accepted the offer, and for those that have studied any contract law, by signing an offer, you have a contract. And he had a contract. He sent it back. The university confirmed receipt of that contract. Again, we're talking about October of 2013. And over the course of the subsequent 10 months, Professor Salaita and the university began preparing for his arrival and for him to start teaching. So what happened? He was scheduled to teach 2 courses. Students were able to enroll in those courses. Course books had been offered and were available to students. Professor Salaita had been assigned an office at the University of Illinois. He was finalizing his furniture for his office. He had a University of Illinois email address. He was given an ID for the University of Illinois. This might seem like a lot of details, but I'm getting somewhere with it, I promise. He was presenting at conferences, being identified as faculty at the University of Illinois, and in addition, he was invited by the chancellor to a fall welcome back faculty reception, and he was given and promised moving expenses, and he was days away from actually moving and 2 weeks away from the semester beginning. So what happened, so this is again, end of 2013 into 2014. Of course, we all know what happened in the summer of 2014, which is in July and August, when Israel began its assault on the Gaza Strip. And in the course of a little over a month, you had over 2,000 Palestinians who were killed, the majority, according to the United Nations, civilians, including over 500 children. And Professor Salaita, like probably many of us in this room, was incredibly concerned about the loss of life that was taking place. So he took to his Twitter, and on his Twitter he posted some strongly worded, provocative tweets about the situation. His intention, he has a young son. His intention was to sort of move people to understand the reality of civilians and children being killed every day, and what he felt in this country was no acknowledgement or awareness about the sense of tragedy. So he wrote some very strong tweets. Quickly, sort of the right-wing media picked up on his tweets, and it started to get some press attention. So on July 22nd, a university spokesman at the University of Illinois was asked to comment on Professor Salaita's tweets, and the spokesman said the following, quote, "Faculty has a wide range of political and scholarly views, and we recognize the free speech rights of employees." Which sounds sensible, right? I mean, professor, supporting the free speech rights of the university, it makes total sense. But something happened in the next 10 days. And I'm going to pause the story there, and I'll come back to what happened. I'll fast forward a little bit to August 2nd of 2014. So again, going back, recruited in 2012, gets the offer, signs in October, now we're in August 2nd of 2014. And Professor Salaita, Saturday afternoon, he's playing with his son on the deck with his wife. He comes inside, checks his email account, and he finds an email from the chancellor of the university. He opens his email, and he finds out that he's been terminated from the University of Illinois 2 weeks before the semester was due to begin. And he was terminated without any explanation for why he was terminated, without any chance to contest the basis for the termination, within the course of the next month, so on September 11th, so 5 weeks later, the Board of Trustees formally voted on an 8-1 vote to affirm Professor Salaita's termination. The university, quickly gave a laundry list of explanations for why they had taken this action, and those explanations read like the 9 tactics that Radhika identified for you. Just to give you an example, and I should say all their explanations related to Professor Salaita's tweets and the substance of his views on a series of issues. So on August 22nd, Chancellor Wise, who was the chancellor of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, gave a statement in which he said that Professor Salaita lacked civility. Of course, she used the term civility, probably unaware, or maybe aware, but ignoring the fact that civility was the pretext given for the genocide of Native Americans, and Professor Salida was to teach indigenous studies at the university, right? And the lack of civility was the basis for the ethnic cleansing of Native Americans. So unaware of that history, lack of civility was the pretext that was offered. And then later, that in court, they started using the argument of he would be a disruptive influence on campus. Robert Kennedy, who is the head of the Board of Trustees of the university, said that Professor Salita's tweets were anti-Semitic, even though they focused purely on criticism of Israeli policy. Now, you don't need to take my word as one of his attorneys for the fact that these explanations were pretextual. In fact, the chair of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Illinois, soon after Professor Salita's termination, gave a statement in which he said categorically that the tweets were not anti-Semitic, and that there was, and from his perspective, they were purely critical of foreign governments' policies. In addition, Professor Salida at Virginia Tech had received stellar student evaluations, including in the area of concern and respect for students in different perspectives. Moreover, in 2012, the University of Illinois refused to take action when a member of its faculty had been confirmed to have spoken at a white supremacist gathering and presented at that gathering and been attending it for many years. When that came public, they took no action. 2 years prior, in 2010, when it came out that a professor at the university had sent homophobic emails to a student in the class, the university reinstated that professor, after initially deciding to terminate him. So just to give you a sense of how the University of Illinois, in actually seriously concerning examples of faculty speech, failed to act. And finally, as Radhika mentioned in her presentation, the Supreme Court is categoric that when it comes to speech that's even, quote, vehement, caustic, and unpleasant, they're protected by the Constitution. I want to read a short excerpt from the case. So we filed on Professor Salida's behalf a lawsuit against the university alleging they violated the Constitution, they violated Professor Salida's constitutional rights and his contractual rights, and several other state laws. So in early August, the court ruled in our favor, and I want to read a short excerpt from that opinion because it relates to how they weighed the First Amendment issues. Quote, "The university's attempt to draw a line between the profanity and incivility in Dr. Salida's tweets and the views those tweets presented is unavailing. The Supreme Court did not draw such a line when it found Cohen's 'fuck the draft' jacket protected by the First Amendment. The tweet's contents were certainly a matter of public concern, and the topic of Israeli-Palestinian relations often brings passionate emotions to the surface. Under these circumstances, it would be nearly impossible to separate the tone of the tweets on the issue with the content and views they express. And the Supreme Court has warned of the dangers inherent in punishing speech on public matters because of the particular words or tone of that speech." Very clear statement on the constitutional legal issues there. So I want to now go back. I told you something happened between July 22nd and August 2nd, right? The university went from saying that we respect the free speech rights of employees to terminating Professor Salida for exercising his speech rights. So what happened? Well, in the course of litigation, we filed 2 suits against the university. The university has been forced to come forward with emails related to their decision-making process. And what's emerged is a picture for what actually took place, which is that a series of pro-Israel advocacy groups, like the Simon Wiesenthal Center, saw Professor Salida's tweets, and they actually mobilized their base of supporters and donors to the university to tell the university basically, we will not give any more funding and we'll rescind our funding unless you terminate Professor Salida. And what we see from these tweets is that it was those emails that actually motivated the Board of Trustees and administrators to take the decision to terminate Professor Salida. Donors found it unpleasant. They didn't want to upset donors. And so ultimately they decided the easiest course of action was to fire Professor Salaita. It's actually remarkable reading the university's emails, because again, you see the story, where as late as July 23rd, 24th, you have administrators between each other saying, shoot, this guy has a contract, he's a professor, we're committed to him. And then the Board of Trustees holds an executive session, off the record meeting, and suddenly the rhetoric changes and the wheels are in motion to ultimately terminate Professor Salaita. And what's also interesting, and one of the reasons why we wrote this report, is that the administration at the university, some of them had bad intentions, but in some cases they really thought these emails they were getting were an indigenous uprising of people concerned about this genuinely anti-Semitic individual, when in reality, as is documented by the emails, this was a campaign by Israel advocates to muzzle someone who criticized Israel policies. So I want to end the portion about Steve, and I'll just take 1 minute after that on a couple other cases, by telling you what's happened over the course of the last 14 months since Professor Salaita was terminated, because it really goes back to where Radhika started, which is, in spite of this suppression of Palestine advocacy, the movement for Palestinian rights continues to grow and continues to change the way in which the conversation is happening on college campuses and throughout the United States. So what happened after the University of Illinois terminated Professor Salaita? Well, the first thing is 16 departments at the university voted no confidence in the administration. A committee, the Committee of Academic Freedom and Tenure at the university, faulted the university, blasted the university for its decision, and called for the decision to be reevaluated. Over 5,000 academics, including Angela Davis and Cornel West, have boycotted the university, saying that it will not give any talks or participate in any events with the university until it reinstates Professor Salaita. The AAUP, which is the American Association of University Professors, the biggest union of professors, actually put the University of Illinois on its censure list. And that may not seem like a big deal, but that list is typically reserved for right-wing, small universities that don't teach evolution. So to put the University of Illinois on that list is a really sort of major development. In addition, as I said, we sued the university. We won the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit, and that led us to get many documents from the university. In early August, as I read from, the court ruled in our favor on the constitutional and contract suit, not only saying the thing that I read about how this case invokes really every central concern of the First Amendment, but actually saying that if you believe the university's explanation, it would undermine the entire system of hiring in academia. And in addition, the two people that fired Professor Salaita, the one who actually sent the email, Chancellor Wise, was forced to resign 3 hours after the court ruled in our favor, literally 4 hours maybe, after we got that decision in August in our favor. And then the provost, who was number 2, and that decision-making process resigned a few weeks later, both citing what took place in this case. And finally, for those that have been following the news, we settled the case with the university last week, and Professor Salaita won a nearly 7-figure settlement, $875,000 settlement as a result of our litigation, sending the message very concretely across the country that we've drawn a line in the sand as a movement, and we no longer will tolerate you continuing to make an exception of our speech. So it's been a victory for the movement, and I think our movement has grown stronger because of the work of activists like you guys in the room. So I'm just going to end. I know I'm almost at the end of my time. I want to give you 2 other small examples that Radhika mentioned, because I think it gives you sort of an additional flavor to this, and we can get more into it in Q&A, of examples of sort of the suppression of Palestinian advocacy. One is another case we work on at CCR, where a small food co-op in Olympia, Washington, decided not to shelve 8 Israeli goods in solidarity with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement several years ago. In response, several members of that co-op that are sympathetic to Israel and with the support of the Israeli government and the Israel advocacy group sued the co-op members on the board that voted in their individual capacity that voted to divest, to boycott those 8 Israeli goods. So just imagine this, a small food co-op in Olympia, Washington decides not to shelve 8 goods, and the members that voted for that are sued in court. And we're now 5 years later, and we represent these individuals, and they're still, and the case has now gone back to trial court, so they're still facing legal action for not shelving 8 Israeli goods. Just to give you a sense of how serious the suppression has been. And the second example that I'll end with is an example from Loyola College in Chicago, where a group of students, there was a tabling event for Birthright Israel. For those who aren't familiar, Birthright is a program that brings Jewish Americans to Israel to sort of reconnect with, as they put it, their homeland. But it's explicitly restricted to Jews, like no non-Jews can participate. So several Palestinian students on their own decided to line up at the tabling event in an attempt to register, to point out that it's a discriminatory program. In response to that action, the university chose to investigate the Students for Justice in Palestine group and actually suspended the group for failing to register their demonstration in advance. And I think the irony of all ironies is that the tabling event itself for Birthright was not registered. And although the university faulted Birthright and Hillel for not registering it, they didn't suspend anybody. The only sanction that Hillel got was that they had to meet with administrators to go over school policy. So just to give you a sense of the kind of disparate treatment we're talking about. But again, this conversation is a sign that the movement continues to grow, and I thank you all for coming again.